Hello, and welcome back to the Let Me Add to That podcast. My name is Elizabeth Graswich, Executive Director of Public Affairs and Communications at the Los Angeles County Office of Education. We are the largest regional education agency in the United States. We serve 80 school districts and nearly 2 million children. We are excited to use this platform to take a deep dive into the conversations surrounding our students and schools in LA County. Welcome back to the Let Me Add to That podcast. I am Elizabeth Graswich, and I am the Executive Director of Public Affairs and Communications at the Los Angeles County Office of Education. Today, we are excited to be talking about a very important topic around hate crimes and incidents in LA County and what schools can do to prevent and deal and help support students related to them. So with me today, I have Fidel Rodriguez, who is the Senior Human Relations Consultant with the Human Relations Commission with LA County and also works with LA versus Hate. Welcome, Fidel.
Thank you.
I also have Jewel Forbes with LACOE. She is the Project Director, too, for Mental Health and School Counseling. Welcome, Jewel.
Thank you.
Can you start out with telling me a little bit about the work each of you do and how that centers on hate crimes and incidents?
Definitely. I'll start with that first question. I have been with LACOE now for 14 years, and my responsibilities here are primarily leading the work around school counseling, violence prevention, crisis response. Under violence prevention is how we address anti-hate work. And so I have been fortunate enough for the last few years to co-lead much of the work in the county. The first one being the co-chair of the Network Against Hate Crime with the Commission of Human Relations in Los Angeles County. And then secondly, to co-chair the LA versus Hate Education Work Group with Miss Wonderful Terry Via McDowell until her retirement just recently. So that is what has brought me to the work. Although I will say it has always been part of my work. Even as a high school administrator and a district administrator, that was part of my responsibility, addressing those inequities and those things related to hate initiatives within the County of Los Angeles.
Wonderful. That sounds really good, right? I'm Fidel Rodriguez, and I've been with the commission for a little over 15 years. I started off as a racialized gang, I would say like an interventionist for the commission back in, I think, 2008, and kind of slowly moved into which really has been my life work for the last 30 years, working with young people, youth development, young adults, assisting them on discovering themselves, assisting them in healing. I was dealing with trauma before it was like the catchphrase, and assisting them in reconnecting themselves with culture, leadership programming, et cetera. And then I left the county in 2018, took on another job. It didn't work itself out. I came back to the county, and then I was gifted to be able to work with Terry Via McDowell before she retired on LA versus Hate. And so I've been with the commission doing that for the last 3 years.
Well, I'm so glad both of you were able to join us and talk about this today. I do want to start for our audience kind of level setting in terms of terms. So can you kind of share the difference between what a hate crime is and a hate incident?
Jewel, you want to share that little piece you have?
Yeah, I'll start just really clarifying. When we think about things that rise to the level of a hate crime, those are things that are related to our penal code in Los Angeles County. So things that rise to the level of a crime so that there can be law enforcement engagement. When we think about hate incidents or hate instances, those are things that might not rise to the level of a crime, but they definitely are things that impact the overall community because they are hate focused. You know, it's unfortunate because quite often those are things that are protected by free speech, but that doesn't mean it's not just as harmful in many instances to that protected class that it is impacting.
Yeah, and LA versus Hate focuses on the incidences, right? But the commission also has an annual hate crime report that's been coming out since 1980. And Yeah, it produces an annual report of hate crime data submitted by sheriff, city police agencies, educational institutions, and community-based organizations. Also, LA County jurisdictions are among the best trained in hate crime investigation and prosecution. This report is one of the longest standing efforts in the nation to document hate crimes.
Definitely, definitely. And there's such powerful work that's being done through the network. And so they meet quarterly, and that meeting is open to community members, anyone who likes to attend, because they share a lot of information, not just around the county, but some of the things that are affecting our nation. And so it's really important for all of us to be involved and attend meetings such as the Network Against Hate Crime meeting.
In terms of the report, what has it shown in terms of trends in LA County in recent years?
I'm glad you asked that. Such a great question. So I think both of us will have a piece that we'll talk about. So it's unfortunate, but here we are in the second highest increase of hate in our county in 20 years. We've seen really traumatic growth across, across the years. But in 2013 till now, we've seen a 143% increase in hate crimes. So remember that all the data is always in a year in arrears. So in 2022, there were 929 reported hate crimes. Now we know that hate crimes are underreported, but we also know that some of the work that we've done to implement systems for reporting has also increased the numbers, because we know that we've seen 929 cases of reported hate crime in 2022. And some of that is really related to that we have better reporting systems in place. But we also know that hate crime is underreported. And so we want to make sure that people within the community and within other systems really know mechanisms of how to report, when to report. So we know that African Americans continue to be the highest targeted population toward hate crime. We've seen a 34% increase in 2022, but we've also seen various groups increase across all levels. We've seen anti-Jewish hate increase. We've seen attacks on LGBTQ populations. We've seen that also increase. Post-pandemic and during the pandemic, we saw rises in hate crimes related to Asian Pacific Islander groups. And so across the board, we're seeing increases in percentages. And so we know it's significant. And so we are working to try to really eradicate hate across all levels. But we know that there's work to be done in our county.
Yeah, and I just, I want to get back and second the issues that are happening towards the Black community, because I think, only comprising of 9% of the population in the county, African Americans represented disproportionately 53% of the racial hate crimes in LA County, which to me is like, me and Terry used to talk about this all the time about the programming that we need to get with the African American community, but more importantly with other ethnicities, especially Latino, because unfortunately that was the largest group that was involved in any of these hate incidences. Secondly was whites. And it's just like, I think at the end of the day, with all these numbers that we're seeing, it's about education. It's about learning to be kind to each other. As much as that's a cliche, it's not, but the other element that I kind of want to bring to the forefront is that there's a lot of stress out there. I think those are the things that we're really not understanding is what's happening in our society right now, right?
Yeah.
If I take anybody and I do little tours around the county with people sometimes, and, I'll go to Wall Street and I'll have people look at Wall Street and they'll be like, man, I said, what's the ethnic groups here? And they're like, man, it's mostly Blacks. I said, oh, interesting. Let's go to the county jail. And I said, let's look at the population there, right? We're looking at the incidences with young people, Black kids and teens in terms of suicide, right?
Yes.
And so not to say that the issues that are happening with the LGBTQ community, with the Jewish community, et cetera, are not significant. They are. But we also have to say, listen, there's a group in our human family that needs attention. And this group needs to be, and I'm saying that because I want to make the point. I want people to understand that the significance of Black culture and as human beings, it's like, my whole life has been about learning about both my brown side and my Black side. I also got Black blood in me, and that's something I didn't grow up with, but I want to make that point. One of the main solutions that we've come through from LA County Human Relations Commission is to be able to contract with a nonprofit called CD Tech in South Central LA, and they have been developing for the last few years a training called Combating Anti-Blackness. Just an incredible 16-hour training where really we're dissecting the history, the stratification, the colonization of what happened with Black Americans here in this country. And it also connects with other ethnicities as well, but it was developed by residents from South Central. That's the beautiful thing about this, is it's coming from a primary source of information from an ethnic group, both Black and brown, that understands their situations in marginalized communities. Hence, this is where I think a lot of these things, it's like everybody has issues within their own families, right? We understand that sometimes people hate each other within their own families. So where does that come from? That comes from trauma, right? How are we connecting these incidences that happen? How are we going to be able, and that's another thing we're doing with the DA's office. We're also working with them to help the perpetrators of this so they can understand what they're coming from. So I just kind of wanted to mention and highlight the issues, because I think that's hugely significant for 54% of our hate crimes in LA County to be Black Americans when they're only representing 9% of the population.
Yeah.
What is that telling?
Yeah. And one thing I'll add to that, Fidel, is that, it's interesting when you talked about the percentage of African Americans within our county, sometimes the smallest groups are the groups we see the hatred focused on.
Yeah.
Because I think there is a perception that they are powerless, and so that they don't have an ability to respond. And so we have to get away from that. But one thing you mentioned was really around this cohesiveness and getting together with other groups, collaborating with other groups, because there's strength in those numbers.
Absolutely.
And so we have to work together to begin to kind of eradicate what we're seeing.
Well, and the thing too that I used to talk to Robin about this years ago is like, if we had a peace report, would it be big?
Nice.
Would it? Yes, of course it would.
Yeah.
Look at the numbers. I'm not saying that the numbers were, I think, at 929, right?
Yes, they were.
It's a big number, but we're in a population of 10 million, right? So I always think about the solidarity, the connections that people have with each other, the things that happen every day that we don't name that. And I think I also want to highlight that we can empower each other to do better, right? To affect that 900. Let's make it 400 next year, right? But we can only do that by changing how our attitudes, our behaviors with each other when we see people, greet people, understand people. I think we can only understand other people's cultures when we begin to understand our own, right? I always say that America needs to go through its therapy session. If you and I, or if I have to go to therapy, which I had to as a kid because I was a little wild, they have to do a case history of you in order to analyze, to find out what's been going on, right? Well, if you're going to do that on the micro level, wouldn't we have to do that on the macro level?
Exactly.
We've never talked about the trauma, and we wonder why all these things are popping up left and right. And especially with this election that's going to be happening, it's going to stir it up because we haven't had our therapy session. And I want to leave with there's a quote that I always invoke. It's by a African scholar named Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and he was a professor of African studies at UC Irvine. He wrote a book called Decolonizing the Mind, The Politics of African Language and Literature. And he says, prescription of the correct cure is dependent on a rigorous analysis of reality. Wow. And that's what we need to do to understand this hate crime report. We have to really analyze. We have to go to the areas where these incidents, and not just look at the area, but what is housing like? What is healthcare like? What are the schools like? And piece all those things together. And I might not have all the answers, but if I bring in Liz and I bring in Jewel and I say, how can we come together? What do you see, Liz? You might see something different than me, but until we, they say like this table is a circle. They say truth is whole, and any partial approach to truth can't give you anything but an incomplete answer. We have to begin to bring in these aspects of truth in order for us to come up with solutions. This is the same stuff that we need to do with kids.
Yes.
Because they have answers. They just need to, I always say it's the context.
Yeah.
We grow up without context. You grew up poor and you just think because you're Mexican, this is indicative of being poor. And it's not. But you think that. You think that when you're growing up and your mom is, my mom was a janitor for 25 years and I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment and I slept on the floor. I didn't even have a bedroom. And I thought that was because I was Mexican, because that's what society told me until I had a mentor, a high school teacher came into my life and recognized that I was smart, right? But it took a long time. But all that to say, this is all tied into even just dealing with the hate crime report or the incidences. We have to uncover and begin to talk about these things.
Yeah, so true.
And the numbers that we've been talking about are countywide. Are our schools reflecting those same numbers?
The schools reflect it in a different way, but I always say that larger society always impacts our schools. So what you see in the county will always be reflected within the schools. It looks a little different because generally in schools, though we may see some hate crimes perpetrated, they generally are hate incidents. And so it's interesting because really, it's important that we capture that data within schools. So oftentimes what you'll see in schools is it'll show up as bullying, as harassment. But unfortunately, what happens is it may be recorded within the school's disciplinary section without the hate piece of it being documented. So when we query that information, it's not always clear. And each district, because it's separate with different policies and procedures, records that information in a different data system. So it's not always shared. Now, we do have some schools that are really diligent about reporting that data. And so that's really important. And then also making sure that they have things in place to address those issues. You think about the protected classes within schools, and so that's students with disabilities, our LGBTQ population, our youth of color, African American, Latinx. We really have to make sure that not only are we training educators and making sure schools understand this, we also uplifting this work within our student populations. And so what does that look like? What does it look like countywide?
Yeah.
And I think both of you are very dedicated to this next question, which is, how can schools foster a more inclusive and respectful environment for our students?
I love that question. I'll start, and I know Fidel will jump in as well. But wow. Okay, so I talk a lot about, policy and procedure. And I know that's just one piece of this. But I say it starts there. And what I mean by that is making sure that we're documenting what is our protocol, what is our policy within our district or within our school. But beyond that, you have to go to how am I sharing that information? And so that really relates to training, educating folks, making sure parents are at the table, number one. But then making sure even students have a voice in really reflecting what is happening on the school campus. Because, schools are often required, of course, to have a survey around climate. So students are responding to about how they feel, around safety issues on school campus. But we have to do a little bit of a deeper dive and say, what is it that is not safe? What can we do to change those things? When I was a high school administrator, we used to do breakfast with the principals. And so we would pick students randomly every month and we'd bring them in and we'd ask the question, what are we doing well? Where are there problems? When do you feel safe? Do you not feel safe? What can we do to make it a better experience? But when you walk into a school that has a great positive school climate, you feel it. You feel it when you walk in the front office, right? Yeah. How people greet you, how they interact with you. And so we have to be very vigilant about ensuring that we are inclusive of everyone, that we're building more equitable systems. We are addressing inequities as we see them, and not only addressing them, but addressing them in a timely manner. Because when we let things fester, it gets larger. And so sometimes it's just recognizing we see a gap. okay, I'm going to step up, and maybe it's just me by myself. But if I jump in and do the work, others will join me. Others will join me. And so I often look at what we identify as barriers as opportunities. Mm-hmm. And that's where we can change systems and dismantle systems that aren't working. I think one of the things is we really have to promote student voice and make sure that we're creating cultures and climates where students can come together to talk about race. One of the things I think you mentioned to Fidel is that students don't know other cultures.
Yeah.
I remember that when I was working in Compton Unified School District, many times the students would say Mexican to all Latino students. They didn't understand that Latino students came from all over. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just one place. And so it really was a focus on educating, but vice versa. People look at African Americans and think, okay, all African Americans are Black. And we are identified often as Black, but somebody might be from Nigeria. They might be from Ghana. Cuba. So we're not one-dimensional. Mm. So we need to understand that we are multicultural.
Yeah.
And so part of that is not only in me training others, but me understanding my own culture.
Yeah.
And so that's something that has to happen in order to kind of push this work forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like knowing our history helps us understand how to become better people, human beings, and leaders. And this includes admin, as it trickles down. Because if we're talking about changing or creating an environment that is cohesive to being at peace, you need that because the cognitive mind in terms of learning cannot understand information if it's in the fight-flight response. Okay, so listen to what I'm saying. So the cognitive mind cannot learn if it's stressed out. Yeah. So if you got a kid in there fidgeting, right? Legs shaking in class, they're thinking about something else that just happened, right? I'm going to share, and I'm going to connect this. So there's a principal that I met, shared a really powerful message with me a couple weeks ago. And he didn't understand it until I brought up what I brought up earlier with Dr. Gabor Mate, who wrote The Myth of Normal. A kid got his shoe stepped on in between classes, and he just went off on the kid, right, wailing on him. Took him to the office, sat him down. He's like, "What the heck happened? Why did you do that?" And he goes, "I didn't drink the orange juice, man. I told him I didn't drink the orange juice." And he's like, "Son, what are you talking about?" He said, "I told my stepdad I didn't drink the orange juice." That morning, his stepdad had beat the hell out of him in his house before he came to school. He was living in his subconscious mind that reality that happened. Wow. And when this other kid triggered him, he went into the fight-flight response because he thought he was being attacked. That's how deep it is, right? Mm-hmm. So how do we create this is what I was telling him. And so your question about how do we create these type of environments in our school system, I'm going to share with you some data. Okay, and I've shared it with tons of principals, and nobody seems to kind of listen to me. If you go on NBC, go onto Google and you Google transcendental meditation, quiet time, NBC news story, you're going to see a story that pops up. Right, it was in a high school in the Mission District. Okay, in the Mission District, this high school was nicknamed Fight School. Okay, because it had so many fights every day. I don't know if you know this story, Jewel. But what ended up happening was they sent all the teachers in the school district to go into transcendental meditation training, right? And what they did in that school is they added 30 minutes to the school day, 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the afternoon, and they called it quiet time. And they begin to have these young people, right? These young people go through, not calling it meditation, calling it quiet time for 15 minutes every single day, right? And what they saw was a dramatic shift where school attendance went up to 98%. Wow. School suspension went down to almost none, right? Their scores, their testing scores went up, right? It's all in the news story. They interviewed kids who had begun this practice in the 9th grade, who are now in the 11th and 12th grade. And they talked about, like, if Jewel and I were in high school and Jewel knew that Fidel was just like wilding out. And she said, man, I've seen Fidel just kind of like totally change, right? So what happens is we have the amygdala. The amygdala monitors our reality, right? So fight-flight response, fighting is a good thing when you need it. So if we're inside of the studio and the doors are locked and there's a fire in here, I'm physically going to get up, and if it's locked, I'm going to figure out how to knock it down. And I just might do it because my adrenaline's running. But what has happened is that we're living in these past memories of things, hence like this young man that I brought up, and we're running this film inside of our head. Sometimes you're running it while you're talking to somebody. They don't know that, but you're running this program. Our bodies are responding to that past incident as if it was in the present moment. Your body does not know if the incident is really happening or you're just thinking about it, right? So the antithesis of the fight-flight response is the relaxation response. It's when the amygdala goes into a calming sense. And it happens the very first time you start meditating. But it also happens when you're in nature, when you're at the beach, right? You can create this all the time. And that's what they did with the school in the Mission District. The data's there. It shows us. This is like a 10-year-old story. And I'm always in these schools going, yo, why don't y'all just start getting quiet time for these kids? It's there, but we're not, and then so if the amygdala is in the calming state, now you can begin to educate. Now you can begin to build leaders. But now back to the point of how do we do that? It all starts with leaders.
Yes.
Adult leaders have to raise and mentor young leaders. It's the only way it happens, and it doesn't, as Jewel knows, it's not in all the schools, but it is in some schools. I've seen principals that are just like amazing human beings who love and care about kids. Those are the ones we need to make examples of to figure out how do we duplicate that.
Yeah. I'm so glad to hear that. And I remember looking at, that type of implementation in the schools. And we know where schools are doing yoga and healing-centered engagement and well spaces and healing circles.
Yeah.
Those are all things that contribute to a more inclusive environment.
Yes. Yeah.
And so we do have to focus on that and make that a priority within the schools. Yeah. Because it changes things. You're right. It changes and shifts the entire environment. And
I want to bring up the Western Justice Center too.
I was going to talk about that as well.
Ahead.
So
go.
No, but I know it's coming down later in the.
Go ahead, please.
One of the things, and I know Fidel and I are in agreement about this, is really for schools to look at the possibilities, those partnerships, those collaborations. And there's some amazing work being done in Los Angeles County. Yes. So though we are highlighting some of the negative trends that have happened, it's so important to talk about the important work being done. Yes. And I cannot shout out Western Justice Center enough. They are doing some amazing transformations in schools. Yeah. Shout out to Sean. And so, but also there's others. We were talking about LA versus hate. We're talking about the Network Against Hate Crime. We also have Brotherhood Crusade. Yeah. We have some amazing things, amazing initiatives, and we're moving in the right direction. We just need others to get on board.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need schools to be at the table.
Yeah.
And we need them to partner with community-based organizations that exist to support them in endeavors. We know schools can't do this alone.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to do. I mean, LA versus Hate also has we've been able to assist in funding to create dream centers.
Yes,
that were based on the model that Asian Youth Center built at Alhambra High School. We have one at Kennedy High School, Morningside, Inglewood High School, La Puente High School.
Yes.
Norwalk High School, and Feddy Middle School and Paiute Middle School out in Lancaster. And just has been an amazing experience to observe. We both contract with the Asian Youth Center as well as 211 and Helpline, Help Youth. Go ahead, why am I forgetting the name? Helpline, yeah.
Yes.
And they run these dream centers. They create safe and nurturing environments, also based around the social justice model and critical consciousness. And more importantly, they're developing relationships with these young people. And I've seen the impact that it has had on these young kids' lives that are being affected by these, young adults in their 20s who just graduated with their undergrad or getting their master's. And these are the type of examples that these young people are seeing, that sometimes maybe their neighborhoods aren't reflecting that, but they're getting it in the schools. And that's, again, we have 7 right now. It would be nice to have a dream center in almost every school of LA, right?
We're excited about that, and there's some proposed legislation that we really want the community to support that expands dream centers and actually will identify some funding. Yeah. And so we're hoping to see that coming within the next year or so. We know that the impact that dream centers have on our students is miraculous. It's really a student-led and teacher-led environment, but students can go there and it's such a calm and warming space. I wish we had things like that when I was in school.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We did, I know we talked about offline bringing up our art interventions. LA versus Hate does art interventions. Yeah. And I want to just highlight, we did a mural at Paiute Middle School in Lancaster, which is 50% African-American, 50% Latino. And we put this mural up that was done with a Tongva, Native American young man, artist, River Garza, shout out to River. Yes. He did this incredible mural on this wall right in front of the school with, again, an amazing principal, right, who opened his arms to us to be able to put this there. And the reason I wanted to bring it up is that we had a portion of it while it was put up on the wall where all the students came out and then members of the community came out, and they're just sitting there and they're just painting, they're filling in. So that issue, that thing I brought up about the amygdala was in the relaxation response. And awesome. You saw it. So now we're highlighting art, and we've known for 30, 40 years what art does for people, right? So we need to get more art programs back in these schools too, because I'm seeing it in real time. And if we really had, funding where we could evaluate these things, you would see the power of art, of poetry, of processes like that can assist in the healing process. And when you do that, then you assist in the academic performance.
Definitely.
It's right in front of us.
Definitely. And it keeps students engaged.
Yeah.
But what I love about the arts is that it's so healing. Yeah. So we can address any type of issues within arts.
Yeah.
And so we do a lot of work with Department of Arts and Culture. Shout out to Elizabeth Nails, who is doing some amazing work, not only along suicide prevention, but also healing-centered engagement. So they're addressing violence, all levels of violence, including hate. And so we know that this benefits not only the students, but it benefits staff as well.
Yeah.
And so we want to see, as Fidel, you're saying, we want to see more of that within our schools. And I know that is part of the plan, is to expand that work for next year and the coming years.
Yeah.
We've been talking about adults and the important role that adults play. What can we do to train more educators and school staff just in recognizing and responding to signs of hate or discrimination among students?
So I'll take the first part of that. Number one, and I mentioned it before, making sure we have protocol in place. But there's so many wonderful things that are happening. And it's not always about funding. There are things you can do that are free. So I'm going to just shout out a few of those things. LACOE has a cultural proficiency certificate program that's open to schools right now, and it's free. It's in partnership with Praxis and Museum of Tolerance. It's 5 sessions, some in-person sessions, some online sessions. But I'm telling you, because I've been a part of this work, it is a wonderful opportunity for educators. I have been working and having conversations with Peter Flores, who is just leading this work across the county. He is vested in really addressing this work. And so just the conversations and the work within those groups has been amazing. Museum of Tolerance on its own is a wonderful way to address training, not only for staff, but for students. They have funding. So everything is free. They'll even help with transportation. And so once you're at the Museum of Tolerance and you take the tour, there are also breakout groups where you can discuss anti-hate initiatives in Los Angeles County. And we look at the current trends. So it's a wonderful opportunity for educators. We also have agencies, like we said, Western Justice Center, who will come into the school and do training at every level. We have Brotherhood Crusade. We have the Asian Youth Center. There's so many different initiatives that are occurring across our county. We welcome you to join the Network Against Hate Crime meetings, our education work group for LA versus Hate. There's no shortage of resources and tools to train people. I also have to shout out the Anti-Defamation League because they have sample curriculums on their website. They have trainings. They have suggestions on how to address hate in schools. You just need to reach out and access these resources. We didn't mention, but there's a toolkit for educators that's coming very shortly that we'll be sharing with all of you. And not to overwhelm you with information, but just to add one more tool. You know, I'm a little older, and so I remember when I was a child, we used to watch a cartoon called Felix the Cat.
Oh, yeah.
And Felix the Cat had his little bag of tricks, right?
Yeah.
So whenever there was a situation, he could reach in that little bag of tricks, and there's this. And there's this, here's a response. So we need to do that. We have to have our arsenal full.
Yeah.
We have to have our bag of tricks. And so those are tools that we might not need today, but I might need them tomorrow.
I like that, the bag of tricks. It's funny you mentioned that, and I go right back to me laying on my grandmother's floor watching that, eating oatmeal.
Cereal.
Right? Yeah, man. I gotta mention our website that LA versus Hate created with Task Force called Explore Justice. It's a website that was inspired by a high school teacher during 2020 in March when Black Lives Matter was on the forefront of raising our awareness about what was happening and regarding racism towards Black folk. And it's a resource, it's a library that was tailor-made for high school teachers to be able to find subjects locally as well as nationally. The history of what is called the Doctrine of Discovery, which was kind of like the foundation for colonialism. There's a piece on Bruce's Beach. There's tons of stuff on there. So if you go on to Explore Justice, that resource was created almost for a library. Like I said, it was inspired by a teacher who was trying to figure out, how do I talk to my students about what's happening right now, right? And so Explore Justice, please visit it. It's got, we're dealing with racism and sexism and transphobia and, homophobia and xenophobia issues. We also are partnering with the Jewish Federation, who created a website which I went through it with one of the creators, and ethnic studies is being pushed statewide. I think the mandate is next year for all schools to have ethnic studies here in California.
Yes.
And so they worked with teachers all across the state, developing a website that coexists with the curriculum. So there isn't really no excuses to not, especially if you're the ethnic studies teacher, to be able to have everything at your fingertips to be able to guide young people to discover not only their own ethnicity, in particular if they're, African American or Mexican or Latino or Asian, what have you, which will allow them to respect other people's culture. So I think we're in a good transition time. I think there's a lot of hope out there. Again, with Western Justice Center, they do a lot of mediation and restorative justice practices. So these are other ways that when issues happen, they're able to talk about things in a much different way. You're able to, but restorative justice is really based on an indigenous concept, native concept, but it takes time. There is no quick fix to things. We have to invest. I always say it's kind of like you're planting a seed. And a seed, I can't grow a piece of corn and the next day expect it to be sprouted and able to eat. No, we have to water it. We have to take care of it. We have to nurture it. We have to watch it to go into maturity. Our brains are no different. And I just say that we have to be patient with these things. And the most important thing that I'm seeing with everything that has been asked today is the ability to build relationships with each other.
Yes.
Everything is based on relationship. People always see me like, why are you talking to them? You're always talking. Because I'm building a relationship. Oh, who's ahead? Oh, I'm going to go meet them.
Yes.
Because you never know how things are going to work out. And that's how a lot of these murals that we've done have happened, through relationships. We had the Summer of Solidarity. We did a mural in Long Beach. We did a mural on the west side on Robertson. We did one, as I mentioned, in Lancaster, one in El Monte, one in South Central. We got more slated this year. And all those things that are happening are based on relationships. At the end of the day, I feel like it's our ability as adults who are figuring this thing out to teach young people on how to first build a relationship with themselves And once you got that one there,
Yeah.
then you can begin to build with others to fight hate.
Oh, that's so important. Thank you for sharing that. Now, I was hoping we talked about Summer of Solidarity because it was such a unifying experience across our county.
Yeah.
So just a wonderful thing. I always think about my mom used to say, she used to always quote Jesse Owens. And she would say, if we walk long enough and we talk long enough, that, we'll discover that we're more similar than we are different.
Absolutely.
And so that's how we really address hate.
Yeah.
Because it really is around how do we educate people and shift minds.
Well, it's first of all, I want to shout out Pascal Cordova. She organized for Task Force all these 5 murals that we did in LA this past summer. What I want to just throw in there, as you're saying this story that your grandmother used to share about Jesse Owens' quote, when you start studying the concept of race, right? And I can pull out Harvard studies. 98.9% of our DNA, our genome, is exactly the same. The only difference is our hair texture and our earwax. Those two are the only differences that human beings have. And if we were different, we would never be able to have children with each other. And I say that, and I could take you down the road of who created this concept. It was an opinion. It wasn't scientifically based. A good book to read is The Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGroy. Incredible deconstruction of this concept of race, because it's a social construct that has been thrown out there, and we're all sitting there basically fighting with each other over a lie that was created.
Yep.
And these are the type of discussions that I love to engage with young people because they get it. They understand it.
So true. Oh, I love that. I love that.
We were talking about tools in your toolkit. I think one of the ones that sometimes people don't realize is that technology can be used as a tool. We often think of it as a place where a lot of hate happens, right?
Yeah.
But you can also use it to combat hate. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's interesting because everything's about social media right now, and especially now with all the AI talk, right? And so it's really interesting because it's not going away. And so we have to find ways to use it in a positive way. So I think for schools, and especially in relation to students, how do we do that? That means that we are being responsible, that we're teaching students responsibility online, and that means digital safety. That means really educating them about the dangers. And so when they're engaging, we expect them to use social media if they're going to. But how do we make sure that they have the information before they go online? As schools, monitoring as much as we can. I know it's difficult because students have devices in their hands at all times and access, but we can limit that access during the educational day. But I think a piece of it has to be about educating parents because sometimes they don't know how to really navigate those systems, and they don't know what their students are doing when they're online and what they're accessing. But a lot of schools and districts I've seen have put things in place for reporting. I know we've talked about 211 LA, but there are other mechanisms where you can report bullying, harassment, hate-related incidents. And so we want to encourage schools to do that, to have some system in place for how do I report this? And what do we do with this information? I think often these things are happening outside the school day by students, but they're happening on the weekends or after hours. So we have to have systems in place as well to really address that. But I think we can take social media and really drive some of the initiatives, right? I mean, just simple posts around building diversity and inclusiveness and building equitable systems. Those are ways we really navigate the negative.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to, I have a lot to say about social media, but it's kind of getting reconnected to what we were saying earlier in terms about learning about our history, learning about aspects of our ethnic backgrounds, about leadership, all these different elements. So I believe social media it can be a tool, right? You hit a key word, Jewel. You said responsibility, right? Which is when you're working with young people is very difficult, especially when adults are actually on it just as much as kids, if not more, right? And I'm just going to bring some facts in. Okay, this year, 38 states filed a lawsuit right? I don't know if you know about this lawsuit from the Department of Justice on Meta, against Meta, because they knowingly created these platforms knowing that they were going to cause mental health issues with teens. We also know that Google had research, didn't share it with anybody, on the effects of social media and teen suicide, right? So we know this data is out there. We know the reality is. This book I brought up just to kind of Jaron Lanier, 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Account. Jaron Lanier created virtual reality. Okay, so most of the people that created social platforms are in this book that don't work for them anymore. You said AI is real. Yeah, it is. And these type of things need to be talked about, because I always say this: your cell phone is like a library. The problem is that everybody is hanging out in the magazine section. That's the issue right there. So how do we teach? It's like, if you saw my algorithm for YouTube, or I'm not even on IG, it's all this historical stuff that pops on my stuff. But if your algorithm is on some crazy stuff, you're going to get crazy stuff in there. We know that the dopamine that's being released is exactly the same as a heroin addict shooting up. So if I was shooting up and I was 10 years old and my mom was sitting there, would you let me shoot up? Of course you wouldn't. Not. But, you know, another documentary that's out there, Social Dilemma.
Yes.
I don't know if you've seen it.
Oh, yes.
It's powerful, and it's needed. We need to talk about these things, because what is happening is our brains are being rewired. That's what's happening right now, and nobody wants to talk about it. And I don't know what the policies are in school districts or with LACOE or LAUSD or what have you, but I'm always like, man, y'all need to lock those phones up inside a bag and let the kids go to school, and then they get them back when they're out of school, because it's kind of like I don't know how hard it is for teachers to have to be able to kind of monitor that, you know. So one, yes, it can be used as a tool, but you have to have the responsibility of it, right? So most of the kids I work with, unfortunately, will probably not get that Ellie versus hate, tag on Ellie versus hate or whatever, because they're on some other stuff. Yeah, I know that. I have kids. You know, my daughter's 20 years old. I know what she's involved in, but I also have seen the stress level of her, especially what's happening in Gaza and Israel, to the effect that it's giving her anxiety.
Definitely.
So that's just my experience with my own kid, and I've seen it with other kids. I'm sorry, this was just the other day. I shot this to her because I know she, I tell her, she knows, I know, Dad, I'm not supposed to be on this that often, but I just sent her this. I was in a bookstore yesterday. It's called The Anxious Generation. Yes. How the Great Rewiring of the Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness by Jonathan Haidt. It's brand new. It just came out. He's a psychologist. But those are real things that we need to talk about as we're talking about the teen suicide epidemic that is happening, when we're talking about the depression, the anxiety, and nobody's saying, oh, could it be the phone that's causing that?
Exactly.
Well, I don't know. The data says that. But again, how do we heal people? How do we get kids to be calm so they can learn? Oh, there's data out there saying that meditation works or yoga works. Oh, we should probably put more of that. For me, I get cognitive dissonance when I'm like, yo, it says drink more water instead of soda. It's better for you. And, you know what I mean? Right. So I don't know if I share too much of my personal opinion, but that's the reality my perceptions of how I see things.
I love that. And so, two areas that I work in very closely, of course, is the anti-hate work, but also suicide prevention. Yeah. And we're always talking about that, those nexus. But you brought up a good point. When we talk about social media and the internet, sometimes that overexposure to things that students shouldn't have, exposure to in such a high volume.
Yes.
So we have youth looking at things around wars. And I'm not saying don't be educated about current events, but when is it too much? Yeah. And when is it unhealthy? And so, how that shows up when we think about mental health and well-being, even when we talk about racism, if you think about people who are perpetuating hate, they know that when we talk about youth, that's a very vulnerable population, right? So they use social media to really reach out to youth, to really start to bring them in and spread their propaganda with our youth, because they know the mind at that time is fresh. And so you think about, how do we begin to address that? I sat on a group with FBI, the target meetings with Jeff Cugno, and that's a lot of what we talked about, is that recruitment piece for people who want to perpetuate hate-related incidents and hate crime and attacks and all those different things. But also, when you think about racism and you think about hate, think about the pressure that many people of color feel and how that impacts your well-being. You know, we were having discussions around Black males who are seen as often the enemy of the state, right? So they are fearful of law enforcement. They are often kept out of systems because of racism and discrimination. They are not welcome within communities. They are the highest populations in jails, camps, halls. And so often you think about what they're carrying. And so the impact of hate on my psyche, how are we addressing those issues? So we have to create these spaces of healing and what you're talking about, and being able to step back and do some yoga and do some healing of our mind spaces, and, you know, looking at how are we choosing healthier lifestyles.
I think the most important thing is we work on ourselves.
Definitely. I love that.
That's
a focus on self.
At the end of the day, I always tell, when I'm doing workshops with young people, I say, there's a Socrates quote that says, I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only show you how to think. And that's really, at the end of the day, I'm working on myself. I'm trying to develop my character based on my principles, right? And that's the only thing that's going to be left here on earth when I leave. It's not about the type of car I'm driving. It's not about the house I live in. It's how people remembered my character and how I treated them. And that's the society I'm trying to build with LA versus Hate and the county work and the collaborations with LACOE and all the network partners, is becoming a version of myself that can assist in being kind to one another and raising the level of compassion.
Love that.
You know, as we close, and you all have shared so much, and it's kind of building on what you just said, what is one step or a couple of steps that anyone can take to begin to turn the tide on all the hate that we're seeing in the world?
Well, I would start with this. Get involved. You know, you don't have to be a specialist in this area. It doesn't matter about your degrees. All of us can do something. And so you need to find somewhere that you fit and look at one aspect and tackle that one aspect. Get with someone else. Fidel mentioned relationship, and I'm usually the one saying the same thing. Everything evolves around relationship. We can't change anything without first building relationships with one another. Everyone we have a relationship with doesn't have to look like us. And so it starts at that very basic level, is get involved, use your voice for positive. You're more powerful than you think you are. And really look at, what would you want? If you had a dream of a perfect society, what does that look like? And what can I do? What is the power that I have to make that happen?
Yeah. I have a couple things. Very practical. I'm all about practical tools. And I'm going to say the first thing I would suggest is learn how to breathe. Okay? And it's how I open up all my workshops. I have everybody take a deep breath in. And I have them do that 7 times. Whenever they're feeling anxiety, a little stressed, a little off, recalibrate yourself with the universe. Okay? We're not separate from the trees, from the land, from the air, from each other. We're all connected. So that would be 1. 2 is learn how to master self. Learn how to master yourself. They call it self-mastery. It's the first 3 habits of the 7 habits is to master self. You go from dependency to independence, right? And once you master self, you go to the public mastery. That's with relationship with people. And they call that interdependence. That's when we can work together. And the ironic part of what I just shared is embedded in all of our cultures. From Mexico, from Nigeria, from Ireland, from England, from, Asia, Korea. They're all embedded in our cultures to have that community feel. I always say the issue that happened here in this country is we all were made to assimilate and forget about our ancestors. So learn about yourself, learn your history, and be kind to yourself so you can be kind to others. And log on to laversushate.org.
Yes, please do that. And use 211 for
211,
resources
yes.
and reporting.
Most importantly,
And
we didn't share enough about that.
Yeah, and just thankful for the leadership of Robin Toma
Yes.
at the Commission for Human Relations and all the group there, Robert Sowell and also Marshall Wong and Marquez Equilibria, who are all doing work, but most of all to Terry Villa McDowell.
Yes.
For having the heart and the compassion to
And
lead
vision.
this work and the vision
Yeah.
to lead this work across our county.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank you both for your words of wisdom. It's been just a fabulous conversation. And I want to thank all our listeners, and we'll see you next time on Let Me Add to That.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. God bless.
Please follow the Los Angeles County Office of Education on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Los Angeles COE. That's Los Angeles COE. Or you can find us on Facebook and LinkedIn at Los Angeles County Office of Education.